So very good afternoon, everyone. I hope you have attended the inaugural session and exciting keynotes which we have conducted early morning and this afternoon. So I welcome you all for this panel discussion that we are having right now. And the topic for the panel discussion that we are having is the imperative of moving core to the cloud, security and privacy ramifications. As you know that after pandemic the things have changed, and most of the businesses are now embarking on the cloud. They're thinking about migrating to the cloud, whether it is a public, private, or virtual private cloud. So while we are moving our cores or maybe our core applications or workload on the cloud, the security and privacy are key considerations. And while we are migrating or we are thinking to migrate the cloud, we need to really think about the security and privacy preparedness. And to discuss the same, we have conceptualized this panel discussion as part of this Financial Conclave 2022. To discuss this particular topic, I have a very eminent panelists with me. I would like to call them one by one on the stage. So first panelist I have from the ICICI Bank, Mr. Ganesh, who is a Chief Information Security Officer from the ICICI Bank. I would like to welcome Ganesh, sir. So secondly, I have Mr. Sabarinathan, who is a Chief Strategy Officer with Wire9. I would like to welcome Mr. Sabarinathan.
Thank you, Mr. Vivek. Thank you.
And to put a perspective from the technology provider point of view, I have Mr. Terence Gomes, who is the country head security for Microsoft India. Welcome, Terence.
Hi, welcome, Mr. Vivek. Thank you.
Yeah, and to moderate this session, I have Mr. Kalpesh Doshi, who is a Chief Information Security Officer for FIS India. Welcome, Kalpesh. So, without any further delay, I would like to hand over to Kalpesh, who is going to moderate this session. And I would request Kalpesh to set the tone of the session, and please take this discussion forward. Looking forward for the great discussions.
Thank you, Vivek. A warm welcome, everyone. We have, I would say, a kind of best brains in the industry today, representing various diverse industry or the sectors, and I'm very sure we would have a very interesting discussion today on the topic, which is about moving the core to the cloud and what are the security and privacy concerns around that. Cloud has been a kind of an essential, I would say, a talking point for a lot of us, especially after the onset of pandemic. Because what pandemic did is it created a new world. We can always go back and say that there was pre-COVID world and there's a post-COVID world. The world has changed because a lot of organizations have really changed the way they operate. We've seen there is a push for a digital, there is a push to the cloud, because we have realized that people are the new boundaries, they're the new perimeter, which essentially means that if you still rely on the old, I would say, centralized solutions, right, of hosting that in your own data center, you're going to find it more and more ineffective. You're going to find it more and more challenging to kind of work with that or enable your workforces on the same. So we are really seeing there is a huge changes which are really happening. When you talk about financial industry per se, right, we are also seeing that there has been a beautiful intersection of technology and finance, right? And we see that's created a lot of disruptors, right? Often challenging a lot of your traditional players. Uh, we are seeing, that be your online banking, be, probably we're seeing that, your use of ATMs will be redundant in some time, right? Because we're seeing the kind of online transactions. We hear this from government, the volume of, online transactions which are happening day in, day out. So we've really seen the impact of what digitalization can really do, and that's going to force every player to adopt cloud sooner or later, right? So I think that's very important. If I had to really throw some facts, because there are a lot of people who say all this is story, as long as you don't throw some numbers, it doesn't make sense, right? It doesn't ring bells to them. So for those of you who love numbers, right, I'm quoting Gartner. right? According to them, the cloud services is forecasted to grow by 20.4% in 2022, and it would total to a revenue of $494.7 billion, and that's expected to go to $600 billion in 2023. That goes on to prove a significant investment that will continue to happen in cloud. Similarly, there was a survey by EU organizations where 72% of the respondents have come back and they have said that they intend, their prime strategy is to move to cloud, right? And the top priority will continue to move to the cloud. So we know that when you talk about cloud today, it is not an option, because every CIO today, if they believe moving to cloud is an option, I think that's going to cost them, because that is not an option, that's an enabler, and that's going to differentiate your business from others, right? So there are a lot of such interesting facts. We'll share that as we move ahead. But yes, the stage is for having our speakers to talk about it. So let me get really started with uh, my kind of a first set of question, and maybe Terence, for you, right? Just continuing with what we spoke about it, we've seen that the last few years there is an explosion of cloud technologies. COVID seems to have just accelerated the movement, right? What are your views and experience on cloud migration, right? Especially from, say, security and privacy standpoint when you talk about core applications. So over to you, Terence.
Sure, Kalpesh. Now, thank you for setting the stage and hosting us. Really excited to interact with you and our audience today. To answer your question, one definitely, I think cloud transformation, cloud migration has been something that we speak about. But I think if you take a step back, what's driving this transformation is actually true business transformation. Businesses are realizing the value that cloud can provide to accelerate their time to market, whether it is customer experience, employee experience, operational efficiency, or overall business value that they can create for their customers. There is tremendous potential there. And when you look at the surrounding ecosystems, application providers, the third-party providers that partner with the financial sector to provide the whole ecosystem, the value-added services, and in your case, Kalpesh, FIS also, who's a very large partner and ecosystem provider to the banking fraternity. A lot of the new innovation and development, is possible because it's being built on new age technologies, and cloud is really enabling that. And the platform in terms of scale, elasticity, in the new age engines, AI, ML, a lot of that really enables us to provide this. So net, I think the pandemic or not, of course, pandemic has accelerated the transformation, but I think businesses and technology leaders, both agree on at least on these points, in that, we need to really innovate, and this is where there's a lot of innovation happening. So I think that has been the journey so far. From a security standpoint, in my own experience, what I have seen, and I think one thing that our technology leaders really stood up and to the time when much required, was making sure that technology enables business and makes it available when needed. So if you look at our three triads of security, it's basically confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And because our technology leaders were able to make sure that the platforms they built on are secure or resilient, they were able to sustain continuity and make work available even when pandemic happened. So I think from a security standpoint, that definitely was a big enabler to enable businesses to continue and do more. Even if it was working remote and working hybrid scenarios. So I think availability definitely was definitely addressed. What are the things that we otherwise see? Things that, of course, as organizations moved and evolved, there were other things that had to, be kept in mind. And when pandemic happened, of course, there was a lot of pressure on continuing business, but things like threat management, visibility, governance, compliance, like making sure we comply with the various, requirements out there, sometimes was not as, as you can see on a score of 10 out of 10, because we had to make sure everything go together. So I think while the journey has definitely sped up, and there's a lot of potential out there. We are seeing organizations making sure that they take those steps to make their environment secure, make their environments compliant, and build that in the overall story. So broadly, that's what has been I would say, my observation and views as organizations are evolving and adopting and transforming to make their business more agile and more scalable.
That's very good, and I completely agree. Innovation has always been the driving force for every change, that we've seen. I completely concur on that. What I'll also do is, Mr. Ganesh, who's a general manager from ICICI, unfortunately had issues with his connectivity, but we are very happy to welcome you, sir. And I'll just pose the question again to you, sir. It was more about that we're seeing that there's an explosion of cloud technologies, and yeah, there is always a belief that COVID must have accelerated that. Now, I always think it's more of people who have learned swimming, right? And they all know the fact that typically you start in the shallow water, you practice all your steps, you practice all your strokes, and you believe you're going to be doing good. And then finally there's a day when you have been pushed into the deep pool, right? And that's where you actually learn swimming, because that it's a fight for survival. And Terence, you rightly said, it's not that the ecosystem was all ready, but then people have learned it on the fly. People learned how to adapt, people learned how to fine tune their strategy, and they made sure, because it was all about continuity, it was all about survivability. So, Mr. Ganesh, your views, right, on experience of cloud migration, especially from security and privacy standpoint, and we'll be very happy to hear your thoughts and views on the same.
Hey, thanks, and sorry for some of those connectivity issues that I had. See, if you ask me, I would say as far as cloud migration is concerned, in spite of whatever has happened during the pandemic, I would say that in terms of genuinely shifting large amount of workloads or something which is critical, I would say we are still early days, and a lot of this journey will start with probably where we are much more comfortable, or where it is more on the basis of ready-made platforms like O365, etc. I think in the case of most organizations of our kind, I think the journey will start, rightfully so, at the periphery, and then will kind of come closer and closer to the core, and that is the stage at which we are in. And obviously there will be a lot of learning that will happen as you do this. And obviously when you are also learning, like you said, you don't want to experiment your learning in a deep pool or in the open waters. You will always want to kind of start your experimentation where it is more comfortable and where you can afford to go a little bit wrong. But even though I strongly believe that in the cloud, your leeway to get things wrong is very, very minimal, because I always tell my teams that you assume that you are already outside of your house. You have to fend for yourself, and there is nothing called, for example, I used to tell people that there is nothing called UAT in the cloud, because everything is in the open. So, but that being the case, a lot of this is, if you ask me, getting played out, and some of the variables that will come into the picture as we do this journey will be the readiness of the organizations like ours in terms of our skills, in terms of our ability, the readiness of some of the partners, because in a lot of cases we are talking about products that we already use, and how ready those products will be to be actually used on the cloud. And the other aspect of what you always hear from people is, are you putting out the right architecture on the cloud, or are you just doing lift and shift? Because in a lot of cases, if you just lift and shift legacy code or legacy application, obviously both your benefits will be minimal, and your scope for, let's say, having some of these security and vulnerability issues are also very high. So I think it is always better to actually take a step back, examine the state of your applications, their readiness, both from a scalability as well as from a security point of view, and then kind of do a calibrated movement, as opposed to simply saying that everybody is going onto the cloud, let's all do something on the cloud, or it makes a lot of this is, if you ask me, a little bit of a myth, because that way there is a lot of agility, but I am a strong believer that if you have to be truly agile, you have to be even disciplined than otherwise. So there is a lot of discipline that goes with it for you to get the benefits of the agility. People cannot confuse, let's say, being ad hoc to being agile, so we have to be careful. So just because both start with A and both have 5 letters, the two are very, very different.
That is a very great input, right? I completely agree here that a lot of this depends on, I would say if you're having a core application, right? The OEM, do they have cloud ready applications? Do they have cloud ready architecture, right? That's extremely important. And I completely concur here that we live in a world, right, where it's not good to say that, I was able to save my organization 99 times, right? Even that one time could have been catastrophic, and it will have, probably great implications for the organization. So I know it's not a fair game, and every CISO struggles, right? That's often a reason, CISOs are seen as being very cautious people. But yeah, I understand the ground realities are very different. So thanks, Mr. Ganesh. I think those are very interesting insights, right? Uh, Sabri, coming to you, right? You come as a tech partner, right? You come as somebody who works closely with organizations, helping them in their journeys, right? So there are so many buzzwords around cloud. There are so many myths and misconceptions, right? Around cloud migration, cloud security. So, as a tech organization, right, what are your views and suggestions on how an enterprise should embark, on the cloud journey, right? Do you think, you should be learning much and much more on the shallow waters? Do you think plunging into the deep pool is the way you go ahead in the journey, or there is a different approach that you recommend for organizations, when they intend to go ahead with the cloud migration?
Sure. Thank you, Kapil, for the opportunity. Right. I think it all boils down to fundamentally what is the business need, why you want to go for it. Because as Mr. Terence also mentioned earlier, that what would it help the organization to do? To help them to, let's say, increase their revenue, reduce their costs, and be a lot more agile and scalable, etc. So if it helps that, I think that has to be the fundamental driver, understanding the business need for it. And then with respect to the nuances of actually embarking on this journey as such, a holistic approach is always essential because, it helps to have that roadmap charted out. Sometimes, it may look very daunting at the beginning to do all of that in one go. So having sort of a cloud migration architect plan this entire thing end to end is primarily very essential. And then the other nuances around, do you want to do a sort of a very shallow, as you said, lift and shift migration where you hardly do any changes to the applications which are there, do it at a very high level, take them as is and put them onto cloud and make them work, or you do a very deeper cloud integration, looking at leveraging the capabilities of what cloud offers to be able to re-architect the application itself, right? So do you go that way or do a simple lift and shift migration? Then looking at whether, there are different types of clouds, as most of you would know, which is public cloud, private cloud, hybrid cloud. Deciding which of the options to choose is very key, is very fundamental, because there may be objections from key stakeholders to say, I don't want my key critical data to be in cloud, right? So in those kind of scenarios, there are options always available whereby you can do a mix of both, which is the hybrid option, etc. And also, do you want to just have a vendor lock-in with just one cloud vendor, or do you want to look at a multi-cloud so that you have options to choose between them? Because there are certain cloud providers who specialize, who have much bigger capability which they have established on certain areas. Maybe go we can choose them for that. Maybe for others, we can choose somebody else as well. And also the other important thing is, define your KPIs pre-migration, post-migration, so that you can understand and substantiate the business case, what you are presenting originally for buying in, right? Because it's essential to have that baseline defined to say, my revenue growth is this much, my page loading speed is this much, my infra performance is this much right now, and then maybe after the migration measure it to understand whether you're really getting the benefit of it as well. And also prioritizing migration components is very essential, because more often, thinking about a big bang all in one go approach in terms of migrating could prove disastrous. So planning it well ahead of time, and also compartmentalizing it into chunks will help the transition a lot more easier. And last but not the least, I would say probably two things. One is training and upskilling the manpower, right? People who are currently supporting existing systems, infrastructure applications, they should be upskilled to be able to make the support easier done in the new world as well, and in the post-cloud migrated world. And also, more often it is advisable to have a trusted cloud migration partner to help you along the journey, because more often it may sound easy, but then there is the detail, as they say, when they start getting the hands dirty, then they may find surprises. So having someone certified, someone who has done this before time and again would certainly help ease the process as well.
I think that is absolutely great. And Sabri, I liked your point on KPIs, right? Because yes, what you can't measure, you never know, are you good, are you bad, right? So that's going to be very critical. I completely agree. Cloud is specialized skill, and you definitely need the best people to run your show. So that is absolutely there. Terence, maybe if I had to throw the same question to you, right? Again, Microsoft, has been a pioneer, right, when it comes to cloud, right? We all know, and we heard Mr. Ganesh also say that, it's kind of secular trend, right? If you have O365, we know it's going to be on Azure. So, what would be your advice, or how would you advise organizations to move the larger chunk, right, or larger workloads to cloud?
Yeah, my first thing would be skilling, Kalpesh, because what we have seen, especially when organizations are looking to embark on their journey to cloud, while the business benefit and the business imperative of why am I doing this is sorted, and you have that clarified, the core team that is working to do that needs to be enabled not just on the IT side of the house, but also how do you bring security from day one into the conversation? How do we make sure compliance requirements for that business, that process are built in? Because it's a combination of, I would say, thinking, skilling from the beginning, making sure the people have the right skills, the ability, because they and the experience, because then they can think that way and avoid costlier mistakes, later on, because it's a different way of computing, right? Slightly different than the traditional on-prem. There is a lot of similarity, but there's definitely differences as well. And then when we look at learnings, right? If you and make sure that security is built in, privacy is part of the design, compliance controls are embedded, and the design from day one is having all of these parameters to start with. It really makes your experience, and the ROI that you're striving for come much earlier in the process, and does not delay your time to value or your return of investment that you may foresee. And for any application, not just Office 365 is a simple application, but any complex business application, process application that you are transforming and innovating. So I would say three imperatives while organizations are looking to modernize. Make sure that there are the right people with the right skills and invest in skilling, and make sure security and compliance are thought from day one as part of the design, and you build it in your in your code framework, and not later trying to do it and go to the security team later and say, okay, now please approve my project. I think then it will just create a lot of delay and friction. Yeah. So my advice would always be work with the security team, bring them in from day one, and get the right skills in place to get the project to a good start.
I think that's a very interesting perspective, right? Compliance, yeah, it's see, FinSec or every financial institutions are highly regulated, right? And I've seen a shift now. See, earlier the focus was about safeguarding the data of the customers or citizens, right? Now I also seen that there is a subtle shift, but there is a evidence shift that it's now getting into national security, because you're seeing there are a lot of state actors, right? There are a lot of new regulations. There are regions, which want to safeguard the data within their boundaries, and from that perspective, if compliance has been overlooked, right, it can have serious consequences, because eventually If you're not compliant with the law of the law in the land, or if your regulator sees XYZ and you're not doing that, right, there is no way you can function as an organization. So that cannot be an afterthought. You have to really put that as your top priority and then plan a journey forward, right? And there are quite a few requirements, right? Localization is one such requirement. You have to have that in your boundaries. When can data move out of your boundaries? When is it to come back to what has to be stored locally? So those things are very, very interesting, right? So thanks again, Sabri, and Terence, for sharing that perspective, right? And yes, skills will always continue to be a dominant a factor, because it's like you have an airplane, you have an airport, you have all the infrastructure, but if you don't have a pilot, all of that is of no use, because you need, end of the day, a pilot who's going to fly the plane. If there are storms, whatever be the circumstances, be able to manage the plane. So I think that's where the skills get into play. I think just moving on very quickly, and maybe a question to all of you, right? In whichever order, right? I've been picking up people, but this time I want to make it democratic. So anybody who wants to go first, but quickly, your thoughts in terms of what are the challenges, what are the impediments, right? In terms of a cloud journey with your experiences, it's more about when you are traveling by the road, right? You see danger signs. Be aware. There is a turn. There is a accident zone, something of that advice from you with your experience. So everybody who's planning a cloud journey from a security standpoint or a privacy standpoint, we have spoken about it quite a bit, but if you had to identify a couple of them, right, what would be your pick on them? As I said, I'll be very democratic, so I'll not choose a order. uh, Anybody can go the way you wish to go, so I'll just keep it open to all.
Maybe I'll give it a shot. The things which readily come to my mind, for example, is executive buy-in. That is very essential. If we don't have that, it's always a challenge, because our IT guy may keep on pushing to say this is the benefit, this is the benefit, but unless the business sees a value in terms of investment turning into some dollars, there's always a challenge. That is one big challenge. The second aspect is the people's mindset as well, in terms of their knowledge and awareness of cloud, the benefit it offers, and sometimes the challenges it poses, which is probably prominently highlighted much more than the benefits. So that could be one of those big challenges. Then data sovereignty we talked about, with pretty much every country, every location starting to build up their own, frame their own data privacy policy and sovereignty policies as such. It is becoming a big challenge for global organizations to ensure data is in the right location so that they are compliant with the local laws and regulations. And the application readiness also, because more often the application may have been legacy applications have been running for quite some time. It may not necessarily be cloud ready as well. So in those kind of instances, it's probably a very long journey for some of them as well, right? So those are some of the challenges which I see are predominantly, coming to the fore all the time.
Very interesting, Sabri. Who goes next? Mr. Ganesh, you're on mute. I guess Mr. Ganesh is having some audio challenges. Terence, if by the time he fixes that, would you want to take it on?
Sure. I can pick that up. I'm just waiting to see if Mr. Ganesh is able to come in, and then I'll definitely follow.
Mr. Ganesh,
No, sir, we can't hear you.
we can't hear you, sir. Maybe somebody from the tech support can just help Mr. Ganesh to get his audio back. Sir, we'll have somebody from the tech support to help you on that. Uh, so Terence, maybe
I can
you
go.
wish to go last. Yeah, you're still going last because Mr. Ganesh has dropped anyways, please.
Sure, I'll go. So I would say my advice, or you would say the challenges that, or the watch outs, right? What should be cautious about? If you look at organizations who've actually struggled with security on the cloud, the number one, and you can pick up any report, any analyst report, Gartner report, Forrester report, whatever you say, like the number one reason for clients to actually have a security incident is not an external issue. It's actually more to do with config management, right? And that's where my previous point on skilling and in making sure the right skilling enablement is done so that you can do the right things from day one. So config management is something as a strong advice, saying good config management, good posture management, security by design should be built upon. That is one call out, right? One set. The second thing that I would definitely recommend our security teams and IT teams to do is making sure you have visibility and governance built in from day one. Cloud is so agile, and not just cloud. Today we are in digital explosion era. So the attack surface is so huge, and if you do not have visibility about what your assets are out there, irrespective of whether it's cloud or on-prem, those assets can typically become your vulnerability points and attack points. So config management is one call out. Second is visibility and control, and third is governance. Right? Just like in the on-prem world, we have security by design. Whether it is desktops or servers, they are not allowed on the network unless they're having a gold standard or a gold image or a secure operating system. Similarly, on the cloud, when you're rolling up new services, how do you make sure you have those guardrails? Right, VMs come up without making sure that VMs have default security by design. Containers are coming in, they have default security. They are in a micro segmentation. Your public endpoints or your public IPs or VMs are not just exposed directly. And actually, you might find it surprising, but we've seen a lot of security situations where we've seen rules which allow everything in and out, inbound allowed, outbound allowed for public facing VMs and no security. And that's not intention. It's just maybe, it got missed out by in the design flaw, and then later on it was found by audit. So as to answer your question, saying what are the challenges or what are the watch outs, kind of cautions, I would say, right, visibility, governance, and config management. If you have these three things in place, you definitely would have a much secure and compliant cloud environment.
I think that's wonderful. I completely agree here. I was looking at a report, and Terence bang on target. It had put cloud, misconfiguration or config management as a top challenges on cloud migration. And you rightly said that's how majority of the issues start creeping in. It was followed by unauthorized access. Again, the same thing. You can't allow any, right? You have to really do the segmentation. You have to be careful about it. So I think really great insights. Ganesh, sir, we're very happy to have you back, sir. Your thoughts in terms of challenges or impediments, sir.
No, I think Shabari and Terence covered quite a bit. And there is one aspect which probably I would like to cover from the point of view of the security practitioners who are looking at some of these cloud migrations. I think one thing which we have seen as very important is understanding how the data is flowing end to end before you architect any particular cloud architecture. Because if you ask me, most of the problems come when you don't know exactly where the data is moving from. And when I say that, I am including everything that is both data in motion and under rest, and today in a lot of very large implementations, it is not just about architecting something for one cloud, it is about architecting the entire data flow, because in a particular transaction flow, you will have data moving across one data center to another data center to another cloud to some other completely different cloud and then coming back. And if as a security practitioner, if you don't have a visibility of how this movement is happening, and then you put controls, and there are going to be humongous amount of areas or humongous amount of blind spots that you will have, which will come and kind of bite you later on. I think quite a lot of other points in terms of things like basic inventory, visibility, configurations, etc. I think both Terence and Sabari covered quite a bit. And also another thing is, if you do the data flow properly, then also help you to understand what are the services that you are using from the cloud and where those services are located, because you have to understand your regulation And we have always seen, Terence knows this very well, we have always seen that while the cloud data center may actually be in India and you may be okay and you think that you are what you call following the lay of the land, but there are certain services which you may be using which may not be offered at that point in time out of India. They may say that there is a roadmap of next year, there is a roadmap of 6 months down the line. So if as a practitioner you are not aware of all of these things, then you could end up willy-nilly in a situation where there is a service which is consuming my data, but that service is not located in India, and data is, even momentary, data is actually moving out and coming back. So these are things that the people will have to be wary of and have complete visibility on not only data flow, but also on services that you use, because at the end of the day, cloud is nothing but a bunch of huge menu card of services that are offered. So you have to be both aware of your data as well as the services that you consume. Yeah, that's from
Absolutely.
me, Kalpesh.
I think those are absolutely great insights, right? And completely agree. Knowing where your data is, right? I think that is fundamental to be able to secure, because what you don't know, you can never protect, right? So, absolutely, completely agree on that, right? I think we touched upon regulatory, and Mr. Ganesh, you rightly said that compliance with regulator is always going to be of a paramount importance for every organization, right? And it's also binding, right? So what are your thoughts, maybe again, what are your thoughts in terms of the providers, right? And maybe this is for Sabri and Mr. Ganesh, right? What do you believe are the cloud providers or cloud service providers, the OEMs, do they understand the regulator space? Mr. Ganesh did mention that it's not that everything is always compliant from day one. There are times when there's a journey, there's a roadmap ahead on terms of how they're going to be compliant with it, right? But what's your views in terms of the industry, the cloud service providers in the space right now, the OEMs in the space, and how much are they compliant, or how much are they working to ensure that the products are always compliant with the regulatory requirements? Sabri, you want to take it first, and maybe Mr. Ganesh after that?
Sure, very much so. Right. Yeah. So I think if you take global providers, they've been in this space for quite some time, and all have very focused organizations and departments within their organizations to cater to things like this. You have GRCO, governance, risk and compliance officers. We have CSOs, data protection officers. Across, and they and also government liaison officers from a legal perspective. They continuously liaise with in the lawmaking bodies to understand what is going on in that landscape, and also because there is quite a lot of cross-border data transmission going on between different locations as well, because backup would be taken in a different country to where the actual original data originated, etc. So because of which these organizations have invested heavily to ensure they are PCI DSS compliant, ISO compliant, the SOC 2, SOC 7 compliant, 27001 compliance, HIPAA compliance, you name them. Every industry pretty much has some kind of a compliance or other to be able to protect the interests of its organizations within that space, right? So now you can pretty much see every cloud provider is absolutely ensuring that they are compliant with each of this to give that peace of mind to that industry sector that their data is secure. And also the next is, now you can see cloud providers are specifically creating government cloud specifically, or military related and related to specifics also, right? So they are embarking on very specific additional controls to ensure that the data is protected. So I'm very sure that cloud providers have done or doing their bit very vigorously to ensure the data of customers is very well protected.
That is great. Terence, maybe I'll come to you, at last in terms of trying to summarize as one of the cloud service providers. But Mr. Ganesh, your thoughts in terms of readiness of, and you have shared some of your feedback already, but in case you want to add a little further to that.
No, I think if you ask me to a large extent, I would say if you are going to deal with some of the really large ones, the 3-4 of them, I think I would largely agree with what Sabri was mentioning. They are pretty much clued on to the regulatory landscape that is there in India and what the Indian regulators require across various sectors, and particularly industries like ours being kind of quite at the forefront in terms of regulation. but the primary responsibility for, let's say, complying with your own regulator lies with you as the customer or as the organization, because that no regulator is going to kind of leave you off the hook because your cloud service provider did do something or did not do something. So let us be very clear. As practitioners, I would say that the buck stops with you and with your organization. And we have always seen quite often, and a lot of their offerings as far as cloud service providers are concerned, we have to also appreciate that we are not catering to some, let's say, to 500 companies in India, they are catering to something like, let's say, 500,000 companies across the globe. So a lot of the offerings are standard. So it is on us to understand what are those offerings and how do they fit in with our own, both our own regulatory scape as well as our own application landscape. So there is a lot of work that is involved, which is heavy. Quite often, the bigger worry to me is less of cloud providers, but more of we heavily underestimate the work that is involved on our side, even to understand something that is supposed to be standard, because it's a huge menu card, so you have to understand what you are ordering. So you cannot blame the hotel to say that no, you gave me this, because the menu card is fairly detailed. And in the case of cloud service providers, I can tell you that the kind of what you call knowledge base and the kind of detail that they put out on various parts of their services is extremely detailed. We can't really what you call find fault with that. So it is for us to read the menu card, understand exactly what we are ordering, and then making sure that it is not just ordering, but we also buy them and cook it properly. So I would say that I would take the onus heavily on we as practitioners as opposed to just trying to kind of put it on the cloud service providers.
I think so. You put it so beautifully well, right? The buck. I think I love that statement. Buck stops with me, and I think that's how regulators look at it. Data owner is finally responsible for data security, and I think that will be the fundamental ever. And I completely agree here that I think the largest challenge is when people start believing because I have a service provider, I have a OEM, or let's say I have a large cloud service provider, security is their business. It cannot be their business. It has to be something that you own up. And I think rightly said, there is a lot of standardization which is in place. I think it's about taking advantages and benefits of that, because if you try and do a lot of custom changes, it just complicates and makes the environment more complex, because cloud isn't as simple as it looks to be, right? There's a lot of efforts that go into it. I think those are really, and I know that on all this only comes with deep experience, and when you're really dirtied your hands, it doesn't come with books. I know for sure. So thanks for sharing that perspective. There is one interesting thing as a cloud service provider, and I think Sabri mentioned that, right? There are government clouds, right, today, which are designed, to help governments, right? Do you think there are similar clouds, or there are opportunities where you could create something for, let's say, banking world or a financial world, right? Or something which is a hybrid, where you can put some of the leading solution play OEMs together and make it a plug and play for the companies? Is that something that can be contemplated? Is that something that has been thought about it, or is it just a wild idea and which will never materialize?
Right. No, so I will just, and I'll answer that question, but also take a step back and say, like, from a cloud service provider perspective, Microsoft follows four principles, absolutely to the core: security, compliance, privacy, and data residency. Right? Because these are the four pillars that enable businesses to meet their own obligations, whether it is security or compliance or auditory requirements. So, as a service provider, we always strive to make sure that these four pillars are given. And when you talk about privacy, like for example, data mining, data access. I mean, your data is your data, and that whole principle, and this is something our own CEO and chairman, right, Mr. Satya Nadella also practices these. We call this the cloud principles. So that's like, it's an executive, and at every level, that's the philosophy and principles we strive for. Second, again, if this is my own personal analogy. We are, like a bank. When you're working at the bank, it's a trust relationship. If there is trust, you will of course bank and prosper. If there is no trust, then you would probably not. Similarly with us, it's like, if we are not able to earn your trust, you of course will never feel comfortable and keeping your so-called money or your applications and data in the cloud. So from my own personal analogy perspective, we are here to make sure that we're trustworthy, and it's all about digital trust, and that can only be possible when we make sure that we give you a platform which is secure, compliant, privacy by design, and those core principles that really make you comfortable get there. So I think that's where, as a service provider, we are continuously striving and investing and making sure that we make our customers absolutely comfortable with the Microsoft cloud. Right, that's that. And then to your point in terms of industry cloud, I cannot directly comment at this point in time right now where, what's the future or the roadmap looking like. But yeah, that's an interesting topic for discussion. Definitely something we should contemplate, debate, and discuss about in the near future. I just leave it there.
Great. I know we are in the top of the hour, and Vivek is already there. So I think if I had to really quickly summarize this, right? Uh, I think at the onset, really thankful to Ganesh sir, Sabri sir, and Terence. I think great insights, right? And as I said, it kind of shows, that we have people who have really worked hard. We have people who have worked on the field, right? And that comes into the play, right? And we understand that there are a lot of myths about cloud, right? Be it the picking up the right service model. Is SaaS a model? Is infra as a model? Is PaaS a model? Right? It starts from there. Goes on to defining what could be a multi-cloud strategy. It goes on to the visibility. We spoke about how hygiene is going to be important, right? We did talk about visibility, and which is where shadow IT goes into play. Because with cloud, you could always, it's very easy to create a new VM. And we said if you keep on creating new VMs and if they're not standardized, they're not configured securely, they're always going to increase your threat vector or threat landscape. So those are very important thing, and I think we had very practical insights for people who want to embark on the journey for moving their core applications onto the cloud. And I think this I have really enjoyed. I have learned a lot today during the session, and I'm just hopeful that everybody who joined us for the session, had enjoyed the interactions and the discussion that we had in the last 45 minutes. Vivek, over to you. I know we don't have time for question and answers, but if you still feel you can
Yeah.
take a couple of them, I'd be more than happy.
Yeah, I
Or
think one or two questions are there, but I think in the interest of time, we can take it offline.
yeah, do me a favor, do us all a favor. Just make sure that you send us the questions,
Again, amazing
and collectively
discussions.
as a group and with the mail ID, we will make sure that we return back. We revert back to that.
Sure, sure. I think I would like to thank all of you for the exciting and amazing discussions on the cloud. Definitely, audience have got the insights and some of the key points about defining KPIs and then making security team involved from the beginning. I think those are really crucial points that audience have got. I would like to thank all of you and Kalpesh for moderating this session. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks. It was a privilege host, kind of moderating the session. Thank you all, and have a good day. God bless all.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.